So I think the first thing today, just to give us all a little bit of context, maybe Sally and Kojo, could you talk little bit about, I guess, your most recent successful grant application and what you applied for, and yeah, give us a bit of an overview of what the project that you're working on at the moment is. Maybe Sally first. Oh yeah, let me.
Okay, thanks. Well, thank you very much for having me. So the recent successful grant funding that I've had is for the Arts ACT 5 to 50K round. And my project was more than $64,000, of which I sought $25,000 of ACT government funding. The rest of the budget was made up of fundraising and in-kind payments or donations from people. And so the project was to employ a large team of people, other creative personnel, so from a variety of arts backgrounds, including musicians, singers and conductors, venues, lighting techs and all of their support crew and their equipment, also a film crew and director and all of their equipment, and even a florist and set designers and lighting and all the things. So we had a large team. It was more than 20 people that I employed through this project, and they're all connected to Canberra, and it was championing the great work that we can do here creatively in Canberra. And the goal is to create 2 music videos. It was a 2-day project for all of that money. And yeah, so in order to get that funding, I applied actually they do 6 months, like every 6 months, they offer this type of funding. And it's really hard to find types of funding available for musicians, especially in Canberra, who can access larger funds, greater than $5,000 for decent projects to be able to pay people properly. And so I treated this like a proper professional project. Every person was paid properly unless they donated in kind, but it was still stipulated in contracts what everyone was worth. And so that's why the budget was what it was.
We'll jump over to Kojo in a second, but you just mentioned something that I think might be important to explain. Could you maybe explain what an in-kind donation is in a grant application?
Yeah, so say that your hourly rate, or you've factored in it's going to take me a week of time, and a base rate might be say $50 an hour. When you look at, if you wanted to employ somebody for that for a week of work, that comes up to some amount of money. And they can choose to give or donate to the project part of that amount of income that they would have received. So say you were meant to pay someone $10,000, they may say, I'm happy to give you $2,000 in kind because I believe in the project, or I just, a little bit of a favor. Ideally, we don't want to do too many favors though in our industry. We actually want to pay people, because our industry, we need to support each other. But for example, I gave almost all my time in kind. So that's what made up the rest of the budget, was all my time, plus a few other things that I paid for myself. Yeah.
Cool. Okay, that's great to know. We're already learning. Kojo, how about you, Kojo? What's your most recent one?
So I just got one for the 5 to 50K as well. The overall budget was for 97 and I got 38. I requested 38 from Arts ACT, and that goes towards my next project that I'm working on, my next record. And basically most of it is to pay Canberra musicians, a handful of musicians from Ghana, where I was born. And yeah, basically everyone is getting paid, which is the most important thing. Turns out making a record is way more expensive than I remember it being, when you consider everyone else that needs to be paid. So the main thing that is happening with this project is trying to keep it as Canberra based as possible. So apart from the musicians, apart from the ones we're using from Ghana, the graphic designers, we're using an animator, video people, the management team as well, in terms of like getting a few extra people on board to help coordinate it all, are all Canberra based. There are very few people on the project that aren't from Canberra. And that's basically been the crux of the project. It was initially meant to be kind of 50-50 here and Ghana, but as you can imagine, can't get to Ghana. So pretty much, just triple down on the Canberra side of it, and then just bringing the Ghanaian musicians in for extra percussion and stuff like that.
Great. That's awesome to hear. That's awesome to hear. So now they've got a bit of context on, I guess, where you're speaking from and what the projects that you two are working on at the moment. Maybe Daniel, did you want to give us a bit of an overview of what the funding options are for artists in the ACT? Like, what are the common ones that people ask you about the most?
Yes, sure, Billy. I might try and start at the highest possible level.
Sure.
And it's something that I think the contemporary music scene, and Sally and I were chatting about this earlier, because she comes from, I guess, a sector or a genre where public money has been important for a long time in making sure that music is continued and is supported and recognised and valued. It's a transformation for the Australian contemporary music scene to start to consider the importance of public money. It's to do with the simple fact that we've been in crisis for a couple of years. Playing live, which is the classic income stream, is not available, and playing live, of course, comes out of the simple fact that recorded music and royalties, etc., are insufficient for reinvestment in your future career. That may change. I think that's coming, actually, but that's another matter. But the importance in the current situation and the value that our community attaches to our music and the directness that our music provides in terms of where we are culturally as a society and as artists is recognised by government, but it's a difficult recognition because the contemporary music scene is incredibly diverse. It has generally held itself up on commercial values, but when that, I guess, that market or that commercial setup collapses, as it has under COVID, it's appropriate and right that it is supported. Now, there's risks that are attached to that, and some of the risks, which I'll bring back to what it means to apply locally, are that you really need to be able to articulate very clearly and very directly what your project's about. I'd note, even with Sally and Kojo, in a sense, I'm pretty sure they know exactly what their project's about, but it's interesting how most people lead on a response with the project technical details, the people I'm going to employ, or the process. In my view, unless you can really lay out in a really accessible way, not only to yourself and to your team, but to the public or the government more broadly, what you're on about and what makes your project unique. And you've got to have that absolutely nailed. The second thing is, once you've got that nailed in terms of your concept, is that you then go to the project details. So you go from a creative concept to the importance of being able to execute your project in a disciplined way. And I certainly know, just chatting to, say, Sally and Kojo, and I've worked with Kojo on his stuff, is that's exactly what they do. They know how to execute. And the reason that they know how to execute is they've had careers. That's very important. But firstly, that especially if you've had some experience in the subsidised sector or the public funding sector, you might have applied for a small grant, and these are the two general funding bodies that are available to you in the ACT. There's the under 5,000 that Arts ACT offers throughout the year, and you can apply for that any time. And then you've got the 5,000 to 50,000 segment, and that is open twice a year. I should know this. Twice a year, and that's a different ballgame. So what I would say to anybody that's looking to start to understand how to engage with funding bodies is that you should only really apply for that under 5,000, and you need to identify a segment of your work that it's worth spending $5,000 on. And I would suggest that somewhere after you've written the song. It's about production, but you've got to also say that, my song, my production, this particular step in my career represents something in terms of mine and the community's creative journey, and you know how to say that in a really compelling way. And that's not easy. I think most people are flat out writing a great tune, recording a great tune, going that extra mile and having to almost justify the work some people almost feel it's narcissistic or it's wrong. And what they end up doing is sort of going to that other side of the story is I'm worthy. Let me assure you, you're all worthy. The problem is that the funding program has already determined what's worthy. What they want to know is what your creative idea is and how you can execute it. So if you can get past and get to what you're about, and you can prove that you can execute it, and then you take some steps with some people to talk through what your creative project's about, and that it's compelling in their point of view, and you've got a good project, you're well on the way to getting your funding. But you need to take it in baby steps. It's 2 steps. One is locally have a crack at Arts ACTs under 5,000. You can start an application anytime. Come and talk to us, talk to your friends, your peers, get that, establish your presence in the mind of the funding body and your capability. And then when you come to something really significant like Sally and Kojo have pulled off, you will be familiar to the system. You'll have articulated a project, not necessarily the same project, very well. And when you come to the next one, you can be ambitious. And I've seen some really great applications over the years. And I'm not pissing in Kojo's pocket. I think he put together a very compelling application. And it was backed up not only by a very great creative idea, which was this exploration of his Ghanaian musicians and working locally to use the very best, but it was also the project plan that he produced for it. Quite frankly, it's one of the best I've ever seen. So, pardon?
I was going to say that leads to a really good question about maybe for Sally and Kojo, just a quick one about how many applications you guys have done, and what the ratio of success is like for you guys, because that's something really important to highlight as well, is that it's not always a yes.
No, you've got to accept knockbacks.
Yeah. So what about you, Kojo? How many applications would you say you've put in for something, for music stuff?
This is actually my first one.
Oh, come on, man.
But I will say that's based on doing a lot of projects in the past and everything being self-funded for a long time. So I think the reason the application was so strong was because there was a lot of kind of social proof, and there's a lot of experience that came into writing that application. So I'll just mention that. But
how does that compare with you, Sally?
My experience is very different. Prior to COVID, I'd probably applied for less than 10, but more than 7 grants. I was trying to look through my thing because I keep a track. And I'd been successful pre-COVID with almost all except 1. And during COVID, so in the last, it's now 15 months, I applied for 21 grants across Australia. And I was only successful on this one. And my grant writing game was like the best it's been in years, kind of thing. And I've got a lot of, experience in writing them. And I think, it's just there's a lot of people asking for funding support. It's a really tough time at the moment with COVID. And for example, Arts ACT, their bucket of money is only around $300,000 to $400,000 each time for these rounds, which really, if you're asking for $50,000 or $30,000, and it's all art forms together, it's very competitive and it's very difficult. So it's really great if you do get one, but it is hard. Yeah,
definitely. It's never certain. It's never certain. That can often lead, I guess, to what am I trying to say? What's the question I want to ask? I want to ask Nick about, I guess, what the overall grant process looks like, not just from the application side of things, but what maybe the review process looks like in that sense, just so people, I guess, have an idea of what they're entering into and where their application goes after they hit submit. Would you be able to speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. But first of all, I'd also like to mention that I, as well as being a MusicACT committee member, I'm also a musician who's coming up to about 30 years in the industry. I have had a terrible record with grants until about 10 years ago, working at a professional level through the 90s. I think I applied for money to do a demo in about 1992, which I was knocked back for. Then working as a professional, musicians don't, when they're going well, they don't tend to look for funding, or they didn't anyway. I think Dan was right when he said that contemporary musicians are starting to look more to collaborate with government or get money from government to kind of further their careers. Certainly back in the day, it was something that you didn't really turn to, but I've had one project funded, album project funded for about, I think it was about $13,000. And one more recently to turn a experimental sound piece that I've done to get some promotional materials around that to actually pitch it to festivals. So I guess that gives you an idea that I actually have an experience as someone who's been knocked back from a lot of grants. I did theatre soundtracks for many years. I was a collaborator on applications. Then more recently, I've been a committee member on MusicACT, so I've advised a lot of people on grants. I've sat for 1 year on the peer assessment panel for ArtsACT. So yeah, I've got a background in being an applicant and being a musician more than being a bureaucrat or being an assessor. So I understand that aspect of it. So the grants process very much looks like the assessment from ArtsACT point of view is they get panels in of practitioners. The one I was on had one musician, one person who worked across genres, including music and theatre. It had a dancer and a theatre maker, and we sat down and we looked at a large number of applications. We assessed them on whether they were viable projects, whether the artists had a track record of doing, of delivering stuff, whether the budget worked out, and whether it was exciting, and whether they'd spoken to the selection criteria. I guess what's important as far as the ACT stuff goes is that the major the criteria that they assess things by is proving that you are going to develop as an artist. So the ACT's framework doesn't necessarily take on board what things will do for your career or what you would want to do. It takes on how you're going to develop as an artist. It's quite a tricky thing for many musicians to do, especially contemporary musicians who come from, a pop or a kind of, making popular music or kind of band music. You don't tend to think about your artistic practice as much as someone who goes to art school or theatre school and says, well, what idea am I interested in exploring? So that's one thing that people do struggle with. I think the second thing is that people struggle with doing something practical and pragmatic and sensible. So you can have you can write a song in your bedroom and find it very exciting and think, well, if I could get this out, I might be playing stadiums within 2 months, and put in an arts application for $80,000, of which you're asking the ACT government for $40,000, saying I'm fantastic. But unless you can prove that you've done something, it's very unlikely to be successful. If you can say, I have done X, Y, and Z, and now I want to take my artistic development to the next level by this, $4,000 grant to help you push you into a new headspace, or work with someone you can learn from. I guess that's a way of kind of thinking about people approaching grants. Is you have to understand that the framework for which you're applying within, what people are assessing it by. So it's really about an exciting idea that you can communicate that's exciting to someone else. It's not like saying to someone, hey, I'm going to be doing a gig, and them going, oh yeah, that sounds cool. You want to actually get people, we're all doing exciting things as musicians. We should be excited about our own work, but it's actually about telling other people about how to make it exciting. So yeah, I mean, that's a few reflections from the inside. I don't know if I've covered
I think that, yeah, you've definitely covered all that and more. I think that's, and that leads us to a really good question about assistance as well, with these applications. Is they're not easy, especially, especially for for musicians when, you know, you get into music to be a musician and then you're presented with, you know, an essay and a spreadsheet. It's not the most intuitive thing. So in accessing assistance for these grants, did either of you, Sally or Kojo, get some help with your applications this time around? Maybe Sally, do you want to go first?
No, I didn't get any like paid assistance or anything. I didn't seek a grant writer. I think if I really do think that these things require a high level of written literacy skills. And if it's something that is really difficult for you, I struggle with it, and I've got great literacy skills, and yeah, it's really hard. So I would definitely seek support to try and show your wording of things and your case. I would show it to as many eyes as possible and take on board all the feedback and keep refining and refining and refining until you can say it as cleanly and simply and succinctly as possible while still being engaging. So being able to talk not just in a business sense and black and white, these are the facts, but being able to talk in a way that engages the people who are reading it. And yet still has all the information, and that's really difficult to do. And I think that is one of the really key things that needs to be for a successful application, basically. Yeah.
And then what about you, Kojo? Did you have any for this one?
So I had the help of lovely Danny B, MusicACT, just to look over it, and also my management team, my manager from my Citizen K team, he looked over it as well. But mostly it was just putting it all together. I think the biggest thing, my first attempt, was focusing on the wrong things, and thanks to some help from Daniel, just kind of reshifting and focusing on a lot of what Sally just mentioned, actually, just being succinct and a bit more. There's a fine line between like being black and white, having a lot of information, and also creatively selling your idea. As I've sat on a panel to do these as well, and as someone who's had to do that and read a lot of them, I found the most difficult ones were people who have kind of written like an essay where you're overwriting, and you have to reread and try to figure everything out. You kind of want everything to be as straightforward as possible and the information to be there, but also, like Sally said, you want to kind of sell your idea and get people excited about it as well. I mean, yeah, short answer is Danny B helped me. My manager helped me a little bit to look over it, but most of it was just having a clear idea and a clear project and just being able to write that down.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point that you just touched on, that, you know, effectively it's not just, you know, here is a test and do this test and you might get a good mark. It's you're pitching, you know, you're pitching this idea, and it's got to be exciting as well as informative. Because at the end of the day, it is a selection panel full of people that are deciding this. And if they're excited about the idea, it might help your application as well.
Yeah, and can I just jump in with that? So I think that the part where you fill out the form online with answering the questions is a separate type of language and answers that you would give compared to a separate documents that you can upload, which might be a business plan, where you then go into a lot of the detail, and you can refer in your online form answers. You can refer to your uploaded material and expand on that, and put then more of a business sense into those documents, especially if you have clear headings. Like, as you know, the online forms, you can't really format stuff very easily. So you want to say in as few words as possible and engaging the pure essence of what it is, that's captivating and keeps their attention, so that then they can be bothered looking at well, I'm sure they will anyway, to look at the other material that you've uploaded. And that's then where you can delve into details and you can put tables and dot points and all those other things to back up what you're trying to do. Yeah.
There are risks with attachments. Sorry. There are risks with putting in too much into attachments. I always advise that wherever possible, that whatever attachments you're making to your application, that you try and compile them as much as possible. Often a really good way to do it is to think of it in terms of actually being, and please don't turn your toes up on this one, but being like a PowerPoint presentation. think of it as a series of easy to grasp slides where bang, 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 you tell them about the cultural purpose of your project, your music purpose, maybe a bit about yourself, and then straight into how you're going to execute. And then behind that, a bit of proof that you can execute, and your history, and who's supporting you and that kind of thing. Sometimes grants require, especially at the top end grants like the 5 to 50, a bit of detail around how you've costed it and expensed it, or plan to expense it, with some quotes. Those are important. But yeah, I've seen some applications with an inordinate amount of attachments. People glaze over at that point. So whilst it gives you the scope that Sally's talking about, be careful about how you blow that out. The other thing I just want to quickly touch on while I've got your attention is MusicACT provides support to artists who are applying for funding. Billy and I have had to put some communication out and about in the past. We are not a funding body. We do not sit on funding panels and decide funding. We are often as surprised or delighted that some people succeed with applications. But one thing I can assure everybody that's listening here today, that in terms of where ArtsACT, at least locally, is going, they have been remarkably supportive of contemporary music and music applications generally. So it is worthwhile to apply, but they are always competitive.
And Dan, am I correct in saying that we're not actually funded to do this? This is something we do because we believe in the community of artists and the community of artists having good information about what's there for them. Is that, I mean,
that is sort of correct. I know ArtsACT, who are one of our funding sources, we've got about 4, have said that they want us to do this work, and they consider that part of the professional development program they specifically fund us for. So it's not a contradiction, no.
Yeah, okay. Well, that's a good clarification.
Perfect. There are some great questions coming in here, and we'll get to these all in a second. So if you do have any, I might ask one more question and then open it up to audience questions, if everyone's okay with that. So yeah, so if you do have some questions, do send them through the chat now. The last one I wanted to ask everyone about is maybe what do you think is the most important thing for like a fresh applicant, someone who's really approaching this for the first time? What do you think is the most important thing for them to remember through that process? This could be something that you've learned through doing a lot of applications yourself, or something that someone said to you along the way that really changed the way that you do apply. I'll leave that one pretty open to whoever wants to go first.
I'll go first, and I mostly learned this from sitting on the panel of reading them, is kind of what we were just talking about being kind of succinct. Having to read like 40 applications takes a lot of time, and you got to think the people who are reading it aren't going to take the time to read through everything and kind of like fully understand. So you need to be as straightforward as possible and just have the information there. So the questions in the online thing when you first write it out, I personally just literally had like, what was the question? How is it unique? Just like answer how it's unique.
Yeah.
If you don't have a particular answer, don't try like bullshit your way through it. Just because it just makes life a bit more difficult as the people reading it and actually trying to judge them. So I guess that's the biggest one is, just be succinct and don't just put extra information because you think it looks good, because it's actually way more annoying.
That's a great piece of advice. What about you, Sally? Have you got anything maybe that someone said to you along the way that helped you out with these, or just try?
Yeah, I don't know. I think, just trying to make sure that, I think it's just reiterating everything that Kojo just said, which is, make things succinct. I'm constantly working on that. And especially if you have already been working in the scene for a while, you kind of have too much stuff. You have to cherry pick and prune, and as you keep evolving with your work, you have to constantly then carefully select what you might use to back up what you're saying, and not just give them the whole everything. But I definitely think writing. I definitely think that the way you write it, the way you put your sentences is the most important thing, really.
It's not a requirement of it, but I think it does help especially if you're a musician or artist, to kind of have a bit of social proof as well, to show that you kind of have been doing this for at least trying to do it for a while, and even self-funding to as big of an extent as possible. Yeah, it's just nice to know that the people getting funded are kind of taking it seriously as well, and then that they're there to actually progress their careers and progress themselves as artists. So as much as it is definitely for everyone to apply, I think it does help to show that you do have some social proof behind you as well.
Actually, I'm sorry, I jumped in. I've got one other thing, which is the letters of support. I think that really matters. When I was applying for RISE funding, they asked me if I had letters of support from MPs, if I had letters of support from sporting personalities, if I had letters of support from people with OAMs or AMs, like, people who've received Australia Day awards, and, really pivotal people in our society, Australia-wide, thinking about supporting what you do. And that was for a federal grant. I assume that if you are trying to have a little bit of an edge and competitiveness, if your project is important enough that it gets the attention and support from somebody publicly really important, or civically, not just within the industry, but more generally, broadly, that they also believe in this project and what its aims are. I think that can help, as opposed to just, say, your teacher or your mentor writing a letter of support, or a colleague. Yeah.
If I can, I can. I've been thinking about this before coming on. I noted down a couple of things. First of all, definitely, I'll reiterate what Kojo and Sally both said. Be succinct, but also sell yourself. So it's so easy to say, I want money to do X, Y, and Z, without saying, my name is X. I am a musician who's had X amount of experience. I've played so many gigs. I've had these little triumphs of, getting airplay, or being recognized, or supporting someone, or, having a certain number of downloads. I mean, you've got to be part of the community and demonstrate a track record. And any artist can do that off their own bat. Start doing stuff, whether it's getting stuff out there or up online. Then be realistic about your project. There's no, if you've only made a demo in your bedroom that's not even out, there's no sense in asking for a 12-track album recorded in Abbey Road. Just be realistic about what you need at this point in your career. Then thirdly, be pragmatic with your budget. Don't say we will work with an internationally recognized producer to be determined. We will need $25,000 to do this. You wouldn't lend money to your mates who ask that under those conditions. So why would you ask a government to give money for you to do that kind of stuff? So be pragmatic. We all, as artists, no matter where you are in your career, there's something to achieve, something you'd like to do, which you need a bit of help to do, and think about what you need at the moment. And then two other pieces of advice around grants. Actually, I should say, and talk to us, talk to people who've gotten the grant. Talk to Dan, we like meeting musicians. We like talking to them about what they want. We like talking to them about what they need and what their perspectives are. Just talk to us. It doesn't cost anything, and it might mean the difference between getting a grant or not. But there are two other things. Don't be discouraged if you don't get them, because as artists, we're always putting ourselves forward for stuff. I would like to support so and so. I would like to, play you my new song and no one claps. I would like to do this recording which doesn't work out, or you write a great song and it doesn't sound great on the recording. Life as an artist is about managing the ups and downs and being resilient. We apply for jobs, in life. Just because you get knocked back for one grant doesn't mean that you're going to be knocked back from others. And at the end of the day, if you put a lot of work into writing a grant that gets knocked back, but it makes your next application, which gets you $20,000 up, that's a pretty good outcome. So be persistent, and then the last thing is do your project anyway. Just don't make arts funding the linchpin of something. So you get knocked back and you say, oh well, it's not worth doing. It's not worth recording that record. You know, there's always a way of doing it. You can do it you can record a song on your phone. You can play a gig in the park. I'm not saying that that's what artists should do all the time, but you can do something successful with whatever means you have. So make funding part of your plan, but not all of your plan. But yeah, come and talk to us about it. Hit us up. Sorry, that went on for a while. So I think
can I just jump in there? I was just going to say, if you do want to do your project anyway, and you've exhausted all your funding options for that 6-month round or year round, and there's just nothing else, I would like to recommend, so often people do like a crowdfunding or something like that, like a Possible campaign or whatever, but I can recommend the Australian Cultural Fund, which I don't see why contemporary commercial artists, like commercial music and contemporary music, why you guys can't use that as well. And it's a platform where people donate. It's just like Possible, but basically people get a tax deduction, and it's an Australian-based thing run through this federal government. And that means then that you can run a campaign to get some funds, and you're guaranteed to have the money regardless of whether you made the target amount or not, and that still contributes and helps you a little bit. So I use that for my fundraising, for fundraising $18,000 for the portion of my $64,000 project. Yeah, so hope that's helpful.
A couple of one comment and an answer to a question. Firstly, quite frankly, applying for arts funding is probably, in terms of return on time, actually incredibly good value. If you take apart or exclude the time you might be spent on your arts practice, and you just add up the time that you've spent on a successful grant, I think you'll find that on a dollar per hour basis, it's actually not too bad. Maybe the smaller sums, but if you're in the realm of picking up grants in the thousands, that's a lot of work to get a grant in terms of hours. If you're spending anything more than 50 to 70 hours and putting a grant together, you're spending probably too much. That said, it's often a very difficult task, and for someone starting out, you might need to take that time and get the support in to get through it. But broadly speaking, it's an exercise where the rate of return is actually quite high. It might not feel like it at the time, though. Just remember that.
Yeah.
The second point I'd make, second answer is to a question by Danny in the chat. No, it's to me. I'm Danny.
Yeah. Oh yeah, we get that one.
When you said artists are writing the music and doing the recording, but you need to know about the execution. What do I mean by the execution? What I'm trying to say is that when you look at a funding opportunity, you are competing with your idea, your creative endeavor. And as Nick points out, it can be very much about developing you as an artist or producing a creative outcome that is unique and interesting. Both are valid and can be combined. But the execution is your ability to identify specifically what you're going to do with the money over time and commit to doing that, and making sure that when you have done that and you've spent the public money, that when you have to acquit the grant, which is a requirement of most public funding, you've got to fill out a form, 12 months hence or whenever it is, to explain how you spent the money. And that's the execution side. That's showing how you firstly up front know what you're doing, and that you've segmented the work or you've captured all the work. And then you've got to be able to acquit it truthfully and sign off on it. Because if you don't acquit it, you will never be able to apply for funding again.
Very important to remember that. I'm going to move on to some of these audience questions now. I'm going to move on to some of these audience questions now, but I'm just going to send through just the feedback form for today's session as well through the chat. If you do have any tips on how we can improve it or anything you'd like to say, please just jump in to that type form and leave us a little bit of feedback. The next question on my list is from Brian, and he says, are music grants for everyone? And what do you say for emerging artists to apply for grants? Which is a very nebulous question, but I think
I sort of understand where that's coming from.
yeah,
I think we're very lucky in the ACT, at least, that we have a 0 to 5,000 funding scheme, which is you can apply to at any time, and that's perfect for an emerging artist. And the process of applying for that grant will compel you to, articulate what you're on about and how you're going to do it. And that's a great thing, even if you're not successful. I know that it might be disappointing, but the process is in many ways as equally valuable as the outcome, which is the funding coming through. It's not a waste to put your ideas down. It's not a waste to put a plan down. And as Nick said earlier, if you don't get the grant, do it anyway. And I was sort of interested in Sally's comments about the RISE grant. She talked about the letters of support and the kinds of people that might support you in your activity. I'd note about that RISE is a seriously large funding body. Sally might be able to correct me, but it only recently came down to a $20,000 allocation minimum. And certainly when it opened, it was in, I think, 50 or 75 plus. So it was a serious amount of money. And, those Commonwealth bureaucrats have got to have something to hang their bloody hats on in terms of sorting their way through these things. And when famous people back you, that gets them going. They think, oh, they've got confidence in this application. And the same rules apply for letters of support wherever you get them, You need to have people behind you that have got some standing or profile, at least an insight into who you are.
Yeah, absolutely. The next question I have on my list is from Mark, and he asks, what are some examples of, or the limitations on, the kind of activities that artists can apply for? So what kind of, what kind of activities are available, or applicable to those specific funds? What would you guys say? Daniel and Nick, you guys might be the best to speak on this. What are the traditional kind of applications you see come through?
Do you want to go first, Nick?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think because the focus of the ACT grants structure is on creative development, I think that it is easier to sell things like I will, collaborate with someone, or I will push my writing to a new part, or I will be able to explore a space in a studio to create new work. I mean, I think it is easier for, and I saw one of the comments asking about PR and touring schedules and stuff like that. I think as a musician, it is easier to sell recording or writing or collaborating as an arts project. Now that's the structure which we have here. There are other grants as well. There are kind of regional touring grants. The Sound Australia have kind of ways into export grants if you want to go overseas. There are kind of APRA have grants. Other industry bodies have grants for different kinds of things. The home front funding has been a different kettle of fish. That said, if you've lost income due to COVID, then apply for these grants. But with the ones that we're talking about, I think that it's easier to sell some kind of creative project. Whether you factor in promotion and release is kind of up to you. But you've got to demonstrate value to you as an artist. I think that's the tricky thing. If I can just say one thing about our system here, the Canberra arts funding is actually remarkable, because I think that the government here actually believe in arts funding, and I think percentage-wise we have a much higher success rate of application to success than other jurisdictions. And it's the same when you apply for Arts Australia funding. And Sally, you've probably got more of an insight here than I do, but the national bodies are their selection criteria tend to be a lot more competitive with a lot fewer successful hits on them. So we've actually got a really remarkable system here, despite the fact that some people might think that it could kind of support career as much as it does creative things. So yeah,
And that
that's
actually,
that's my reflection.
yeah,
on that
and that
question.
actually leads nicely into what I think might be the last question for today. So thank you everyone for joining in. This one is from Julian, and he asks, are there many grants available for events and live music in the current COVID climate? And are there any major differences in applying for grants of this nature compared to grants for artists?
Yes, is the short answer, but it's not an artist grant. It's the Amp It Up Fund, which is actually granted to venues. Broadly, Arts ACT does not fund festivals or events. There is, of course, though, ACT events grants and tourism grants. And if you can show that there is economic, tourism, social, cultural, economic development outcomes through your art and your project, you may get funded. They're a tough row to hoe if you're serious about your music, though. I think the other thing I was going to say is that in order to broaden your horizons on the potential funding available, make sure you're a MusicACT Music Pro member, and you will be on the Upbeat newsletter list. And Ruth and Alan, Ruth O'Brien and Alan Scoe, who put that together, constantly feed arts funding opportunities. And you've got to get your head inside each of the particular arts funding opportunities. They're quite different, and they are all about establishing an area of activity that is worthy for support. It goes back to my earlier comments. And then, as Nick says, in particular for the Arts ACT funding, it's about, you know, your creative development, your big creative outcome, and how we can facilitate that. And it may be stretched. I think that's true to touring or live performance outcomes. But broadly, if you're a live performer in the ACT, and I don't think this is a bad idea, if there's a venue that you like playing at, you should speak to them and say, what are you doing about Amp It Up?
Yeah, that's true. That's some really good advice, is because these venues are going to be getting a lot of funding, most of which, or it's 50% of that funding is guaranteed to artists. Is that right?
Oh, more than that.
More
of the 500,000, it will go to venues, and venues have got to provide a program, and they can, most of it is artist fees. They can apply for a small proportion of production and marketing, but I think that when that's been reviewed, that's like 10 or 20% at the very most.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Amazing. Are there any other questions for today? If there aren't, then we can wrap up. I'll just send through that feedback form again. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming today. Huge thank you to our panel, Sally, Kojo, Daniel, and Nick. You guys are the best. Thank you so much. Yeah, if you do have any other questions, please send an email to info@musicact.com.au or reach out to any of us. We're here